The Canadian Army, formerly Land Force Command, is the Army of Canada. The Canadian Army is one of three environmental commands within the unified Canadian Armed Forces. As of September 2013, the Army has 21,600 regular soldiers, about 24,000 reserve soldiers, and 5,000 rangers, for a total of 50,600 soldiers. The Army is supported by 5,600 civilian employees. It maintains regular forces units at bases across Canada, and is also responsible for the Army Reserve, the largest component of the primary reserve. The commander of the Canadian Army and Chief of the Army Staff is Lieutenant-General Marquis Hainse. The name Canadian Army only came into official use beginning in 1940. From before Confederation until the Second World War, the official designation was Canadian Militia. On April 1, 1966, as a precursor to the unification of Canada's armed services, all land forces were placed under a new entity called Mobile Command. In 1968, the Canadian Army ceased to exist as a legal entity as the Royal Canadian Navy, Canadian Army, and Royal Canadian Air Force were merged to form a single service called the Canadian Armed Forces. Mobile Command was renamed Land Force Command in the 1993 reorganization of the Canadian Armed Forces. In August 2011, Land Force Command reverted to the pre-1968 title of the Canadian Army. History. Prior to Confederation in 1867, the British Army, which included Canadian militia units, defended Canada in wartime. After 1867, a permanent active militia was formed, and in later decades several regular bodies of troops were created, their descendants becoming the Royal Canadian Horse Artillery, the Royal Canadian Dragoons, and the Royal Canadian Regiment. Regular Canadian troops participated in the Northwest Rebellion in 1885, the South African War in 1899, and, in much larger numbers, constituted the Canadian Expeditionary Force in World War I. In 1940, during World War II, the permanent active militia was renamed the Canadian Army, supplemented by the non-permanent militia, which was named the Canadian Army. The Army participated in the Korean War and formed part of the NATO presence in West Germany during the Cold War. In the years following its unification with the Navy and Air Force in 1968, the size of Canada's land forces was reduced, but Canadian troops participated in a number of military actions with Canada's allies, including the Gulf War in 1991 and the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, as well as peacekeeping operations under United Nations auspices in various parts of the world. Despite Canada's usual support of British and American initiatives, Canada's land forces did not directly participate in the Vietnam War or the Iraq War. Structure. Command of the Army is exercised by National Defence Headquarters in Ottawa. The Army is divided into 5 divisions: 1st Canadian Division, 2nd Canadian Division, 3rd Canadian Division, 4th Canadian Division, 5th Canadian Division. 1st Canadian Division serves as a deployable headquarters in the event of a major mobilization of Canadian forces on operations, and has taken the place of the previous Canadian Joint Forces headquarters. The other 4 have replaced the previous geographical land force areas, and are responsible for administering all regular and reserve force units within them. The 2nd, 3rd and 4th Canadian Divisions have a regular Army mechanized brigade group under their command, together with between 2 and 3 reserve brigades. Each mechanized brigade group contains 3 infantry battalions, an armored regiment, an artillery regiment, and a combat engineer regiment. Each brigade group also contains a service support battalion and a signals squadron. In addition to the 4 regional command areas, the Canadian Army Doctrine and Training Centre, previously called Land Force Doctrine and Training System, commanded by a Major General and headquartered at McNaughton Barracks, CFB Kingston, Ontario, is responsible for the supervision, integration and delivery of Army training and doctrine development, including simulation and digitization. It includes a number of schools and training organizations, such as the Combat Training Centre at CFB Gagetown, New Brunswick, and the Canadian Manoeuvre Training Centre at CFB Wainwright, Alberta. Leadership. The senior appointment within the Canadian Army was Chief of the General Staff until 1964, when the appointment became Commander, Mobile Command, in advance of the unification of Canada's military forces. The position was renamed Chief of the Land Staff in 1993. Following the reversion of land forces to the Canadian Army in 2011, the position became Commander of the Canadian Army and Chief of the Army Staff. Officers are selected in several ways: the regular officer training plan, where candidates are educated at the Royal Military College of Canada or at civilian Canadian universities. Direct entry officer plan, for those who already hold a university degree or technology diploma. Continuing education officer training plan, addresses shortages in certain officer occupations, and is intended to attract candidates who are otherwise qualified for service as officers, but who lack a degree. Candidates complete their degrees while serving in the Army. University training plan, designed to develop selected serving non-commissioned members for service as career officers in the regular force. Normally, candidates selected for this plan will attend a RMC or a civilian university in Canada. Commissioning from the ranks plan, provides officers to augment the number of officers commissioned through other plans and applies exclusively to those who have acquired some military experience and possess the necessary qualities that make them suitable for employment as officers. Special Requirements Commissioning Plan, is designed to meet the needs of the officer occupations. It allows the Canadian Forces to profit from the skills and experience of senior non-commissioned members and may provide an opportunity for career advancement for selected deserving chief warrant officers. Subsidized special education, which includes the medical officer training plan or dental officer training plan. In addition, there were other commissioning plans such as the Officer Candidate Training Plan and Officer Candidate Training Plan for commissioning serving members, which are no longer in effect. Occupational training for Canadian Army officers takes place at one of the schools of the Combat Training Centre for Army-controlled occupations or at a Canadian Armed Forces school, such as the Canadian Forces School of Administration and Logistics or the Defence Public Affairs Learning Centre for officers from career fields controlled outside the Army. Regular force. Canadian infantry and armoured regimental traditions are strongly rooted in the traditions and history of the British Army. Many regiments were patterned after regiments of the British Army, and a system of official alliances, or affiliations, was created to perpetuate a sense of shared history. Other regiments developed independently, resulting in a mixture of both colourful and historically familiar names. Other traditions such as battle honours and colours have been maintained by Canadian regiments as well. Approximately two-thirds of the regular force is composed of Anglophone units, while one-third is Francophone. Between 1953 and 1971, the regular Canadian infantry consisted of 7 regiments, each of 2 battalions. The 3 present regular infantry regiments were augmented by 3 further regiments, each of 2 battalions, the Canadian Guards, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, the Black Watch of Canada, following the unification of the 3 services to form the Canadian Armed Forces in 1968. The regular force battalions of the QOR and the Black Watch were dissolved, the regular regiment of the Fort Garry Horse was disbanded and the Canadian Guards were reduced to nil strength. The 1st Battalion of the Canadian Guards was disbanded on October 1, 1968. On July 6, 1970, the 2nd Battalion, the Canadian Guards, was reduced to nil strength and transferred to the Supplementary Order of Battle, with the unit soldiers and officers becoming the 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment. On July 1, 1970, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the Black Watch of Canada were reduced to nil strength and transferred to the Supplementary Order of Battle, and the Reserve Force Battalion automatically relinquished its numerical designation. On September 15, 1968, the 2nd Battalion, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, was reduced to nil strength and transferred to the Supplementary Order of Battle, while when the 1st Battalion was reduced to nil strength and transferred to the Supplementary Order of Battle on April 27, 1970, with the unit's officers and soldiers forming the 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. The Reserve Force Battalion automatically relinquished its numerical designation at that time. The Canadian Airborne Regiment was disbanded in 1995. The Regular Force Regiment of the 8th Canadian Hussars, formed in 1957, was converted to a mixed regular and reserve OE total force Euro unit with the close out of 4 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group at La, Germany in 1994, before reverting to a reserve regiment in 1997. Army Reserve. The Army Reserve is the reserve element of the Canadian Army and the largest component of the primary reserve. The Army Reserve is organized into understrength brigades along geographic lines. The Army Reserve is very active and has participated heavily in all regular Army deployments in the last decade, in some cases contributing as much as 40% of each deployment in either individual augmentation, as well as occasional formed subunits. LFR regiments have the theoretical administrative capacity to support an entire battalion, but typically have the deployable manpower of only 1 or 2 platoons. They are perpetuated as such for the timely absorption of recruits during times of war. Current strength of the Army Reserve is approximately 15,000. On April 1, 2008, the Army Reserve absorbed all units of the former Communications Reserve. Note: light infantry and heavy infantry are obsolete historic British Army categories for lightly equipped troops who could march fast and rove ahead of the main army force, and the normal infantry who marched slower but could handle the normal fighting and were not so lightly equipped. All Canadian infantry units in the war in Afghanistan were loaded even more than historic heavy infantry ever were with body armor and large rucksacks, even those with light infantry in their title, for example PPCLI. Organization of the Army, Canadian Army Headquarters, Canadian Army Doctrine and Training System, 1st Canadian Division, 1st Canadian Division Headquarters. 2nd Canadian Division, 2nd Canadian Division Headquarters, 2nd Canadian Division Support Group, 2nd Canadian Division Training Centre, 5 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group, 5 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group Headquarters and Signals Squadron, 5E Regiment Artillerie Léger du Canada, 12E RA Copyright Regiment Line de Copyright du Canada, 1E Battalion, Royal 22E RA Copyright Regiment, 2E Battalion, Royal 22E RA Copyright Regiment, 3E Battalion, Royal 22E RA Copyright Regiment, 5 Combat Engineer Regiment, 5 Service Battalion. 34 Canadian Brigade Group, 34 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, the Royal Canadian Hussars, Le RA Copyright Regiment de Hull, 4E Battalion, Royal 22E RA Copyright Regiment, 6E Battalion, Royal 22E RA Copyright Regiment, Le RA Copyright Regiment de Maisonneuve, Les Fusiliers Mont-Royal, the Black Watch of Canada, the Canadian Grenadier Guards, the Canadian Grenadier Guards, the Royal Montreal Regiment, 2nd Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 34th Signals Regiment Signals, 34 Combat Engineer Regiment, 34 Service Battalion. 35 Canadian Brigade Group, 35 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, Sherbrooke Hussars, 12E RA Copyright Regiment Line de Copyright du Canada, Le RA Copyright Regiment de la Chaudière, Le RA Copyright Regiment du Saguenay, Les Fusiliers de Sherbrooke, Les Fusiliers du Street-Laron, Les Voltigeurs de Quay Copyright Bec, 6th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 62nd Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 35 Combat Engineer Regiment, 35 Service Battalion. 71 Communications Group, 712 Communications Squadron Euro Montreal, 713 Communication Regiment Euro Beauport, 714 Communication Squadron Euro Sherbrooke. 2 Canadian Ranger Patrol Group Euro Richelin, 4 Intelligence Company Euro Montreal and Quebec City. 3rd Canadian Division, 3rd Canadian Division Headquarters, 3rd Canadian Division Support Group, 3rd Canadian Division Training Centre, 1 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group, 1 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group and Signal Squadron, 1 Royal Canadian Horse Artillery, Lord Strathcona's Horse, 1st Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 2nd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 3rd Battalion, Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, 1 Combat Engineer Regiment, 1 Service Battalion. 38 Canadian Brigade Group, 38 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, the Saskatchewan Dragoons, the Fort Garry Horse, the Royal Regina Rifles, the North Saskatchewan Regiment, the Royal Winnipeg Rifles, the Lake Superior Scottish Regiment, the Queen's Own Cameron Highlanders of Canada, 10th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 26th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 116th Independent Field Battery, 38th Signal Regiment, 38th Service Battalion. 39 Canadian Brigade Group, 39 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, the British Columbia Regiment, the British Columbia Dragoons, the Rocky Mountain Rangers, the Royal Westminster Regiment, the RCAF 4th Highlanders of Canada, the Canadian Scottish Regiment, 5th Field Regiment, RCA, 15th Field Regiment, RCA, 39 Combat Engineer Regiment, 39 Signal Regiment, 39 Service Battalion. 41 Canadian Brigade Group, 41 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, the South Alberta Light Horse, the King's Own Calgary Regiment, the Loyal Edmonton Regiment, the Calgary Highlanders, 20th Field Regiment, Royal Canadian Artillery, 20th Independent Field Battery, RCA, 41 Combat Engineer Regiment, 41 Signal Regiment, 41 Service Battalion. 4 Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, 6 Intelligence Company. 4th Canadian Division, 4th Canadian Division Headquarters, 4th Canadian Division Support Group, 4th Canadian Division Training Centre, 2 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group, 2 Canadian Mechanized Brigade Group Headquarters and Signal Squadron, 2nd Royal Canadian Horse Artillery, Royal Canadian Dragoons, 1st Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, 2nd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, 2 Combat Engineer Regiment, 2 Service Battalion. 31 Canadian Brigade Group, 31 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, 1st Hussars, the Windsor Regiment, the Royal Hamilton Light Infantry, the Lincoln and Welland Regiment, 4th Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, the Royal Highland Fusiliers of Canada, the Essex and Kent Scottish, the Argyll and Sutherland Highlanders of Canada, 11th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 56th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 31 Combat Engineer Regiment, 31 Service Battalion. 32 Canadian Brigade Group, 32 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, the Governor-General's Horse Guards, the Queen's York Rangers, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada, Ontario, the Royal Regiment of Canada, the Grey and Simcoe Foresters, the Lawn Scots, 48th Highlanders of Canada, the Toronto Scottish Regiment, 7th Toronto Regiment, RCA, 32 Combat Engineer Regiment, 32 Service Battalion. 33 Canadian Brigade Group, 33 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, the Ontario Regiment, Governor-General's Foot Guards, the Princess of Wales' Own Regiment, the Hastings and Prince Edward Regiment, the Brock the Rifles, Stormont, Dundas and Glengarry Highlanders, the Cameron Highlanders of Ottawa, the Algonquin Regiment, 2nd Battalion, Irish Regiment of Canada, 30th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 49th Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 42nd Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 33 Combat Engineer Regiment, 33 Service Battalion. 2 Operational Support Group, 700 Communication Squadron, 705 Communication Squadron, 709 Communication Regiment, 763 Communication Regiment, 772 Electronic Warfare Squadron. 3 Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, 2 Intelligence Company, 2 Intelligence Platoon. 5th Canadian Division, 5th Canadian Division Headquarters, 5th Canadian Division Support Group, 5th Canadian Division Training Centre, 36 Canadian Brigade Group, 36 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, 36 Canadian Brigade Group Band, the Halifax Rifles, the Prince Edward Island Regiment, 1st Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 84th Independent Field Battery, RCA, 45 Engineer Squadron, the Princess Louise Fusiliers, the West Nova Scotia Regiment, the Nova Scotia Highlanders, the Cape Breton Highlanders, 36 Service Battalion. 37 Canadian Brigade Group, 37 Canadian Brigade Group Headquarters, 8th Canadian Hussars, 3rd Field Artillery Regiment, RCA, 56 Engineer Squadron, 1st Battalion, the Royal New Brunswick Regiment, the North Shore Regiment, 1st Battalion, Royal Newfoundland Regiment, 2nd Battalion, Royal Newfoundland Regiment, 37th Service Battalion. 72 Communications Group Euro Halifax, Nova Scotia, 721 Communication Regiment, 722 Communication Squadron, 723 Communication Squadron, 724 Communication Squadron, 725 Communication Squadron, 728 Communication Squadron. 5 Canadian Ranger Patrol Group, 3 Intelligence Company, 3 Military Police Regiment Lower Sackville, Nova Scotia. Bases and Training Centres, 2nd Canadian Division, 2nd Canadian Division Support Base Montreal, Garrison Valcartier Garrison Street Jean, 2nd Canadian Division Training Centre Valcartier. 3rd Canadian Division, 3rd Canadian Division Support Base Edmonton, Garrison Wainwright, Garrison Shiloh, 3rd Canadian Division Training Centre Wainwright, 3rd Canadian Division Training Centre Detachment Shiloh. 4th Canadian Division, 4th Canadian Division Support Base Pete-Ottawa, Canadian Forces Base Kingston, 4th Canadian Division Training Centre Meaford. 5th Canadian Division, 5th Canadian Division Support Base Gagetown, 5th Canadian Division Training Centre Gagetown. Equipment. Canada is an industrial nation with a highly developed science and technology sector. Since the First World War, Canada has produced its own infantry fighting vehicle, anti-tank guided missile and small arms for the Army. Regular and reserve units operate state-of-the-art equipment able to handle modern threats through 2030-2035. Despite extensive financial cuts to the defense budget between the 1960s and Euro 2000s, the Army is relatively well equipped. The Army currently operates approximately 10,500 utility vehicles including G-Wagon and 7,000 MV and also operates approximately 2,700 armored fighting vehicles including the Lav II and the Leopard 2. The Army also operates approximately 150 field artillery pieces including the M777 howitzer and the LG-1 Mark II. In the near future, between 2011 to 2017 the Army will receive a new family of tactical armored patrol vehicles which will eventually replace the RG-31 Nyala and Coyote reconnaissance vehicle, known as the Textron Tactical Armored Patrol Vehicle. The dismounted soldiers will be equipped with a long-awaited integrated soldier system designed to improve command execution, target acquisition and situational awareness. The Army will receive a new family of engineering vehicles especially designed to clear pathways for troops and other vehicles through minefields and along roadside bombs and improvised explosive devices. This new family of vehicles will eventually replace the aging fleet of AEV Badger, ARV Taurus and AVLB Beaver. The Army infantry uses the C7 rifle or C8 carbine as the basic assault rifle, with grenadiers using the C7 with an attached M203 grenade launcher, and the C9 squad automatic weapon. The Canadian Army also uses the Browning High Power and the SIG Sauer P226. Newer variants of the C7 per Carat 8 family have since been integrated into common use throughout the Canadian Armed Forces. The C7 has most recently been updated in the form the C7A2. The major internal components remain the same, however, several changes have been made to increase versatility of the rifle. Changes include adding a TRIAD rail mount system to the front iron sight which allows accessories such as laser designators and tack lights to be added. Also, the fire control selector lever has been made ambidextrous in addition to the cocking lever. A much-needed 4-position telescopic butt stock has been added to better accommodate different-sized shooters. But, perhaps most obviously the rifle has undergone some aesthetic changes, moving away from the traditional all-black rifle to one with olive green in the handguards, pistol grip and sight cover. Uniforms, load-bearing and protective equipment. Canada's battle dress developed parallel to that of the British from 1900 to 1968, though always with significant differences, and then increasingly followed the American pattern of separate uniforms for separate functions, becoming distinctively Canadian in the process. Prior to unification in 1968, the uniforms of the RCN, CA, and RCAF were similar to their counterparts in the forces of the United Kingdom and other Commonwealth countries, save for national identifiers and some regimental accoutrements. With unification in 1968, all branches started wearing a new rifle green-colored service uniform. The present distinctive environmental uniforms in different colors for the Navy, Army and Air Force were introduced in the late 1980s and have a different cut and color than their pre-1968 counterparts. The Honorable Peter Mackay, Minister of National Defence, announced on July 8, 2013 the Government of Canada's intent to restore Canadian Army rank insignia, names and badges to their traditional forms. Meals, field kitchens and catering are used to feed members of the Canadian Army personnel at bases and overseas operation centres. For personnel on patrol away from bases, they are supplied individual meal pack. The IMP is used by Canadian forces, with the Canadian cadets using the American MRE. Other types of rations are used by the Canadian forces, notably fresh rations, or cooked meals provided directly from the kitchen or by haybox. There are also patrol packs, which are small high-protein snack-type foods and boxed lunches provided for soldiers to consume in situations in which meal preparation is not possible. Rank structure. Military rank in the Canadian Army is granted based on a variety of factors including merit, qualification, training, and time in rank. However, promotion up to the rank of corporal for non-commissioned members, and to captain for officers, is automatic based on time in previous rank. Some ranks are associated with specific appointments. For example, a regimental sergeant major is held by a chief warrant officer, or adjutant held by a captain. In some branches or specific units, rank titles may differ due to tradition. A trained private within the Royal Canadian Armoured Corps is a trooper, whereas the same rank within the artillery is gunner. Other titles for the rank of private include trooper, fusilier, rifleman, craftsman, and guardsman. For a comparison of ranking structure, see ranks and insignia of NATO. Not shown are the various appointment badges for specialist positions such as base chief warrant officer, drum major, etc. Insignia, Commander-in-Chief, Officers. Canadian Army traditional insignia for commissioned officers has been restored, effective August 2014, following the restoration of the Canadian Army in 2011. The Canadian Army rank structure is shown below. Non-commissioned, battles involving the Canadian Army. The Canadian Army has participated in the following campaigns as a combatant: Second Boer War, Battle of Paardeberg, Battle of Leliefontein. First World War, Western Front, Second Battle of Ypres, Battle of Somme, Vimy Ridge, Passchendaele, 100 Days Offensive. Siberian Expedition. Second World War, Pacific Campaign, Battle of Hong Kong, Aleutian Islands Campaign. Italian Campaign, Sicily, Italy, Battle of Ortona, Hitler Line. Northwest Europe, Deep Raid, Juno Beach, Operation Market Garden, Battle of Normandy, Battle of the Scheldt, Battle of the Rhineland, Battle of Groningen. Korean War, Battle of Kapyong. Afghanistan, Operation Anaconda, Operation Apollo, Operation Mountain Thrust, Operation Medusa, Battle of Panway, Operation Falcon Summit, Siege of Sanjin, Operation Achilles, Operation Hoover, Operation Moshtarak. Note: the Canadian Army was involved in the Battle of the Medak Pocket, but the actual type of involvement is under dispute. Publications: Canadian Military Journal, Canadian Army Journal, see also. History of the Canadian Army, Canadian Forces, Canadian Special Operations Forces Command, Regimental nicknames of the Canadian Forces, Intelligence Branch, Permanent Active Militia, Non-Permanent Active Militia, Primary Reserve, Canadian Rangers. References. External links: Canadian Army website, official website of the Canadian Army, Faces of War, the Canadian Army at Library and Archives Canada, Army Car, a web forum and interactive wiki dealing with both current and historical issues related to the Canadian Army. Battle Honours in the Canadian Army by J. R. Grodzinski, CanadianSoldiers.com.